Good morning. It's your favorite nasally toned podcast host. Why do people say that? You know,
When they say you have a face for radio?
is this the ugly stick joke?
No.
Oh. Pastor Eugene has a great ugly stick joke.
So they say you have a face for radio?
Yeah.
And a voice for silent film?
That's good.
Okay.
Wait. People have been saying that I have a very nasal voice. I've been trying to fix it, but I don't know how to. But that's just my voice. I don't know how to do that. But today, nonetheless, regardless of whether my voice is nasally or not, it is the day. It is June the 23rd of 2025, Monday morning, and we have a brand new episode of the Dear Church podcast for you. We are continuing our discussion on church history. If you thought last week's church history episode was good, wait till you hear this one. This is also church history.
It was like a brief summary.
Yeah, very brief. It was like we flew by thousands of years. And so
1,000 years, yeah.
1,000 years. And so thanks to Nick Needham, because I needed him. But people like that one. People have told.
I don't know who these people are.
People have told me, do you write down your jokes? Which I thought was the highest compliment. It was the greatest honor.
Why wouldn't you write down your jokes?
I like the organic blueberries. So I like it when it's more organic. So, but yeah, I told them, no, I don't. And so now that I think about it, I don't know if they were glad I didn't or whether they were mad I didn't. I actually don't know what their reaction
They're
was.
saying.
Like I should.
Maybe you should, yeah.
Oh, it felt like the opposite, but maybe I was misreading the situation. But regardless of whether I write my jokes down or not, today is church history, and it's Presbyterianism Part 2. You are listening. What did you do last Monday again? What was last Monday? Was it a holiday?
It was Father's Day Monday.
Right. Hope you enjoyed your Father's Day Monday last Monday. This Monday is just a regular one. Conquer the day. You are listening to the Dear Church podcast. Welcome to the Dear Church podcast, where we exist to fill your ears and your minds with the study of God to see the world as disciples of Christ. My name is Sam Yang, and we have with us Pastor Eugene and Junsuk. And no camera angle for me today, which I am actually happy about. I don't really like the zoom up.
Because we're missing Brian. We're missing his phone.
I'm not a big I don't really go for fame. You know what I mean? I'm kind of humble like that.
Didn't someone say to you, if looks could kill, you'd be completely harmless?
I would win the Nobel Peace Prize. Yeah, I feel like people have said that kind of rhetoric to me, but words don't kill me.
Yeah, I mean, someone actually did go to you and someone was talking to me about you the other day.
Yes.
Remember?
Yes.
And they said he has a really great personality.
Oh, that's not.
Thank God for that.
I'm not known for that. Not known for that at all. But I think, today as we continue, I wanted to just quickly review, I guess, the point of why we're doing this, the broad scope or the big question, if you will. And what we're trying to do in last week's episode and today's episode is see what the Bible shows us about church government, which we did in Acts 15, and then see how that is played out in church history. We talked about the councils last week. We were talking about the tension that it was leading to with the Western and Eastern church. And the question that we'll be hoping to answer is, why Presbyterianism? Why is Presbyterianism the biblical tradition that has been handed down to us from the apostles? Why is the biblical model of church government Presbyterian? That is the main idea of what we're trying to accomplish here. Right? Or did I get that wrong?
Yeah, no. I think the big question, and you mentioned Withrow's book last week.
Yes, great book.
The big question that he tries to answer too is between the three forms of government, which is prelacy, presbytery, and what's the third one? It's congregationalism, but independency. That's
independency.
So he says prelacy presbytery and independency. So which one is the biblical form of government? And, by looking at history, looking at how they, would interpret the Bible and what we see in the Bible, it could kind of help.
Speaking of prelacy, if I had to, I would probably want to be the Archbishop of Canterbury. It just sounds cool.
Yeah, I mean, you probably would have wanted to kill John Huss too.
No, I meant modern day, not like back in the day, like modern day. That'd be a good position to have.
Modern day might be
modern
worse,
day is definitely worse, like theologically, but I'll be a good one.
Who knows how many people they killed? Just.
You think they do that today? That's tough. But speaking of, actually, this is unrelated. But we are moving on. We talked about some of the tensions of the Western and Eastern Church last episode, and we even saw it in the Council of Chalcedon. And the tensions finally broke in 1054 as the two churches officially split into the Eastern Church and the Western Church. The Eastern Church was led by what was called the Patriarch of Constantinople, Michael Cerularius, and the West was led by Pope Leo IX. And this was not a happy-go-lucky affair, as both leaders actually excommunicated each other in their respective domains. And we see what is the Roman Catholic Church today from the West, and the Orthodox faiths like the Greek Orthodox, the Russian Orthodox Church as a descendant of the Eastern Church. So there's this split here. How do we make sense of this?
Why is that funny?
I don't know where to go. So there's a split here, Pastor Eugene.
Yeah, it was between what we classically know as the Great Schism is the split between the Eastern and Western churches.
Yep.
That may not have been exactly how they saw it. They saw it as a split from the Church of Rome. That's how we could maybe see it a little better. The West was the church centralized in Rome, and the East was the Eastern Orthodox. We had places like, there was a major church in obviously Constantinople, which you had referenced earlier. And then
Antioch too, right?
There's Antioch, there's Alexandria, and there's, I think, one more Jerusalem. And so there were 5 including Rome. And the reason why, it led up to this great schism was once the popes, meaning the Western Church or the Roman Church, started to get more and more power, the Eastern churches were not happy about that. Why do they get to dictate everything? Now, mind you, when we talk about the filioque clause, the Western Church is right about that. We still side with the Western Church on that, but it was more than that. It was the way the Western Church would assert its dominance, not just theologically, but also now, ecclesiologically, governmentally. They believe that the Pope should have the ultimate authority, which then the Eastern Church rejected. They didn't like that, the trajectory that it was going this whole time. And now you see the popes really consolidate a lot of power. Up to this time of the schism, like kings would bow down to the Pope. And if they were excommunicated, if in the West, meaning Europe, if kings were excommunicated from the church, they would be rejected as a king, especially if that nation was Catholic or, Christian. And so filioque is probably what a lot of people remember if you take your history courses, right?
Could you just review what that was for people that may not know? It's the addition.
Right, and the Son.
Right.
Filioque means and the Son.
So it's the question of who sends the Holy Spirit, or who
the Holy
sent.
Spirit is sent from the Father, and filioque means and the Son.
Right.
And so, the West added the filioque, meaning and the Son, to the creed. The East rejected that. So it wasn't just one thing. I get it that in school, maybe even in seminary, you would have seen it as just one thing, but it was a lot of things.
Yep.
Like they saw communion differently. leavened versus unleavened bread. So it was, people say it was cultural, but they read their culture through their theological lens.
And I mean, we even discussed the Chalcedon formula last week, which actually was a point of dissension as well. So even the doctrine of Christ was something that they didn't fully see eye to eye on. And so there are a lot of things that led to this split, but it eventually happened in the year 1054.
Yeah, formally, right.
Right.
But then theologically, the West was more sound. However, it wasn't perfect, meaning when we talk about communion, it's the Western church that uses unleavened bread. That's why Roman Catholics still to this day use those crackers.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's unleavened bread because, leaven is seen as like an evil thing
Pharisees.
in the Bible, right? And so you don't need leaven in the bread. The Eastern church specifically used leavened bread because leaven meant life. So this bread isn't a dead bread. So unleavened would have been seen to them as like a dead bread. And so the Eastern churches would use leavened bread. I mean, as Protestants now, we don't care which one you use.
How come,
we don't really distinguish, rather.
How come you add just one N and it becomes leaven when it's really leave? Leaven is leave with an N at the end, right? So it becomes leave, but then it becomes leaven, not leaven.
Yeah, probably because it's from a different word.
Oh.
See, all these this is a completely side tangent.
Sorry.
So all these like words that have different endings and different like pronunciations of suffixes and perhaps even some prefixes, what they stem from does it have Germanic roots or does it have Romantic roots?
Romantic.
And so if it has like, let's say a Latin root, it'll be pronounced differently than something with a Germanic root. So it's not really not that confusing because, there's all these like these videos now on like TikTok or Instagram where it's like, pronounce this and then you add a letter, pronounce this and it's completely different. It's because of the Germanic root or something to that effect. But anyway, going back to what we're talking about. So we have different jurisdictions. The Pope would claim universal jurisdiction over, again, Rome, Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch, and Jerusalem. But the Eastern Church did not see it that way. They saw themselves as equals, right? And so, that's where we are.
And so from this, we have, again, the Eastern and Western Church. And moving right along, we have the Western Schism from the year 1378 to 1417. All of my research today, by the way, is from the Encyclopedia of Britain. Britannica, I think they call themselves. Just to give credit where credit is due. But this Western Schism was a little different in that it was not a split of the church, but it's the split within the Western Church, where from a period of 1378 to 1417, there were three opposing popes. First, you have Pope Urban VI, elected even in the midst of a desire for a Roman or Italian pope from the people. And Pope Urban VI was not Italian or Roman. So we have his election. And then because Urban VI was not great towards the cardinals, a group of cardinals went away and elected one of their own, a cardinal to be pope named Clement VII, with the accusation that Urban VI's sixth election was invalid because it was made under fear. So there were two popes. One was residing in Rome and the other residing in Avignon. I think that's how they pronounce it, in southeast France. This went terribly for the Roman Catholic Church. It was very confusing for the people. Not to mention they were bad-mouthing each other. And so this was a terrible image, and it decreased in prestige for the papacy. So cardinals from both parties joined together for what was called the Council of Pisa in 1409, and then elected Alexander V as the pope. Now we have three. His successor, Pope John the 23rd, summoned the Council of Constance in 1414, which removed himself from office, had Gregory the 12th, who was the Roman Pope, resign, and dismissed Benedict the 13th, the Avignon Pope. So, on November of 1417, Martin V was elected and was the sole pope for the Roman Catholic Church.
Yeah, I could say that one of the significant parts about this time is because there was that, not only the Great Schism that we saw in 1054, but now we have this Western Schism.
Yep.
It really did weaken the papal authority.
Yes.
So now we saw a consolidation of power within the papacy and started to get weakened more and more during this time, because now, now we're vying from each little segment of the population, whether it's like in Germany or France or Rome. And so you almost had like a triple schism going on. Mm-hmm. And so Constance was Germany, modern day Germany.
Constance, the Council of Constance.
Yeah. And so in Avignon, you said, is France. But
Never been there, though.
I mean, it's fine. You've been to Florence, it's fine. And
I did. Yep, I did. Oh, you're right.
So we have these places now that are vying for power, saying you need to elect this one. This one is the more legitimate pope. It did lead to some reforms, like on how to elect popes, and so that's why we have this because of that chaotic election in Rome, and there was mob pressure that was about to split the church. And so it exposed a lot of the flaws within, even how to get to vote for who the Pope is. And so, yeah, I mean, that's where we are. We saw like how consolidation of power into one person would lead to, almost invariably, would lead to corruption. It's Lord Acton who famously said that, power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And it's not true just for only one person. So for the rest, it holds pretty much true.
Yeah, that's a scary thought. Lord Acton was right. He wasn't Acton. I wish I got something from you, like, even if it's like not, but I get nothing. Moving on, during this time, during the 14th and 15th centuries, there are little whispers, if you will, little whispers of the Reformation. And this is prior to the Reformation. We have John Wycliffe in England. Do you say Wycliffe?
Wycliffe.
There's John Wycliffe of England. He was a theologian that started to attack the Roman Catholic Church, most emphatically on the doctrine of transubstantiation, which again is the belief in the Roman Catholic Church that the bread and the wine that is offered at communion are truly Jesus' body and blood. Well, I mean, then what do we think about Christ being at the right hand of God? But that's why they're wrong. But he also is the one that promoted the translation of the Bible into English as well. And this also led to someone that was influenced by John Wycliffe, Jan Hus. He was a reformer from Bohemia, which is current-day Czech Republic, who was convicted of heresy at the Council of Constance that we just talked about, and he was burned at the stake, actually. He denounced indulgences, also claiming the supremacy of biblical authority over the Catholic Church.
Yeah, we got these two key figures of the early Reformed movements, or the early Reform movements, and we'll see that these are precursors to the Protestant Reformation. Wycliffe and Huss are two, they're huge figures that drove the Protestant Reformation. But these people just showed you that just because they had some papal reforms or some reforms in the past, it didn't get rid of the overall corruption in the system of the Western Church. Again, we are, we're descendants of the Western Church, if I may, theologically. And so this is why I continue to follow along the Western line, as imperfect as it may be. we do believe, like, even with the filioque clause and all that stuff, the Western Church was right on that theologically. And so this is what we want to continue on. So we didn't just come from nowhere. We didn't just pop up and say, hey, let's just follow the Bible. There has been tradition. There has been history. And now we have these two great figures like Wycliffe, who would talk about indulgences, who would talk about why is the church so rich and why is the Pope so powerful? Is that right? And who would argue for what we now know as sola scriptura. And so he wanted to complete the translations of the Bible. Then he was condemned as a heretic, right? And so we have the followers of Wycliffe after that. I don't know, what are they called? Wycliffeans?
Wycliffites, I think.
Wycliffites, and then the Hussites, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So John Huss also was someone in Bohemia, and he went against the same thing very similarly as Wycliffe did. He just didn't translate the Bible into English because he wasn't in England. But I think Wycliffe's followers are called Lollards. Am I right?
That was later on, yes.
Later on? Okay.
But I fully... Yes, yeah.
Okay. All right. So with the schism, and then we see the Western Schism and this kind of breaking down of the system, and then you'll see like a great struggle for a lot of these powers to regain that power that they once lost. And that's what that's how I kind of see it. And so with the vie for new, not just papal authority or these papal authority figures, but the actual authority conglomerate itself, people trying to make sure that the Pope still has the power that it once held, was a big indicator of how, people will still try to get to the ends and saying that will justify whatever means we take, right? So that's why we see people like Wycliffe and Huss just martyred for for what they believed in, which they were right, obviously, and they were burned at the stake for it.
I don't know why I said later. I made that up. It wasn't later. They were called Lollards, and it was a pejorative name derived from the Middle Dutch Lolaert, mumbler, and it was applied to the followers of John Wycliffe. I have a question. So, we read about the movement of the church in this way, and even hearing about Wycliffe and his desire to translate the Bible into English, which it means that the general population didn't have access to the Word of God as we do today, obviously. So I guess my question is, if the teaching from the church was incorrect, if the teaching from the church was heretical, what happens to all those people? Because it wasn't like a bunch of different churches were teaching different things. There was one church. So if someone from the medieval ages was hearing preaching or teaching from a priest, and it wasn't biblical, does that mean during that stage of history, people didn't go to heaven? Like, how do we make sense of that?
So, yeah, I think it's too simplistic to think that just because we had teachers teaching this, that everybody just followed it blindly. That's not true. Mm-hmm. When we get on to later the Scottish Reformation,
yeah.
Like people were upset, mm-hmm. Like not just visibly upset, they would act it out in a violent manner, like a riot. Okay,
yeah,
that's how mad they were. So people understood what they were, and I get it. Maybe they weren't able to articulate exactly what their theological position and why, but they had their beliefs, and it was taught from somewhere. So not every single priest was in line with, let's say, the papal authorities' teaching and whatnot. And so we had people like Wycliffe, and we got people like John Huss, who came out and would teach properly. And I do believe that the people of God resonated with that. So I get it that, before the Reformation, people might be confused as like, well, did anybody go to heaven because they didn't have the right doctrine? But you'll see that even through all of this, that God continues to raise up people to show us that he did set aside people that did not bow and kiss the kiss the ring of the king, or give himself to Baal, like you see in Elijah.
And I think it again reminds you of the amazing position that we are in today in 2025, in that we have not only resources teaching us theology, but we have the Bible in our hands. Like that, for the majority of human history, was not the case. And so even the fact that we have a Bible, that we have multiple Bibles, you can own as many Bibles as you want. The fact that you have that freedom is pretty amazing if you think about all the people that lived during this time, even during this pre-Reformation time where they didn't have access to the word as freely as we do. It was all in Latin. You couldn't understand it, or the commoner couldn't understand it. I mean, they couldn't even read at that point, I guess. And so this is an amazing blessing that we have today. And so I think it's just another reminder of God's goodness even throughout history.
Well, Wycliffe really did set the stage for the Protestant Reformation, because his goal was to translate, the Vulgate to the English language.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that meant that commoners had access to it. Mm-hmm. It's a lie to think that every single person was, obviously you didn't say that, I'm just saying if people think like in the past everyone was stupid, no one was literate, that's not true.
No.
And in fact, because of the Bible translations, even more people became literate as time went on. Mm-hmm. And so it would help not only because we had Bibles being printed, but it will lead to other renovations, like people will want more of it. So you'll see like in 100 years, the printing press come out too.
Yeah.
And
Gutenberg.
Yeah. People like Wycliffe and Huss, their lives, even though the church thought they extinguished their flame, it's actually not true. What it did was it sparked and it fueled the fire of a whole generation of people, and they desired change. And that's where we would go next to the Protestant Reformation.
Some of the last words of John Huss, spoken in 1415, as he was being swallowed up by the flames, I believe, is, "You are going to burn a goose, but in 100 years you will have a swan which you can neither roast nor boil." And people think that he was talking about Martin Luther there, a statement for the future. And we have the Protestant Reformation in 1517. Yeah, Huss, I think, meant goose. Yeah. So it was a pun, but...
Yeah, he just meant that, I don't know. I mean, people can conjecture, but I mean, if you just take it literally, there's going to be someone like me that you just can't kill.
The effect, right. And so we have in 1517, the Protestant Reformation started in 1517 by a German monk named Martin Luther. We all know that this movement was one that challenged the unbiblical traditions of the Roman Catholic Church and led to a breaking off of the true church from the Roman Catholic one, namely the Reformed Protestant Church. And this is the tradition in which we are worshiping now.
Yeah. So continuing on with, some of the reformations that people desired that had been emboldened by the heroes in the past, it initiated other acts of heroism, like by Martin Luther with his 95 Theses in 1517. And then we had other figures that we talked about in this podcast before, like Ulrich Zwingli or John Calvin even. Mm-hmm. John Calvin's a big one for us because he led to the Presbyterian ecclesiology mainly. He was like the father of it, that we know it now, as we know it now.
So John Calvin, speaking of John Calvin, Jean Calvin, I believe his French name is. He was French.
I think it's just John.
I think it was Jean, like.
But you pronounce it John.
Dude.
You don't say JEAN-PAUL is Jean Paul. You say that's Jean Paul.
I meant. Sorry, my accent was a little off. I meant Jean. Is what I meant. Okay. Jean Gauvin. I took high school French, so I stopped at 2 though. It goes up to 3. His influence, especially in the 5 points of Calvinism, like you mentioned before, he's a big contributor to the Reformation. 5 points of Calvinism, a major part of how we remember him today. I think if you were to think about John Calvin, you'd automatically think maybe predestination. And the 5 points, or TULIP as we like to call it, total depravity, unconditional election, limited atonement, irresistible grace, and the perseverance of the saints. Fun fact, the 5 points of Calvinism came about after Calvin had passed away, actually. It was a summary of his teachings as the students were duking it out theologically with the Remonstrants.
It was in response to the Remonstrants.
Who were followers of not Jacob, but Jacobus, Arminius, the author of the Arminian theology that we see today. Mm-hmm. So John Calvin, a big proponent of, a big part of the Reformed tradition. What did you mean by he's like the father of Presbyterianism?
He wrote extensively, and then you could see it in his institutes, about church structure. He talked about a consistory. He talked about eldership. And he basically laid out the blueprint for Presbyterianism as we know it. And his influence with John Knox is obviously, something that we're familiar with. They were friends. And it was pivotal because John Knox would study under Calvin and then go back to Scotland. And so these are things that, we saw where Calvin would play a pivotal role into Reformed theology as we know it today. And it became the foundation to not just the Protestant Reformation, but the Presbyterian Church.
And with the Presbyterian Church, we see in the Scottish Reformation, 1560. This Reformation was a movement led by John Knox, who said that one celebration of the Mass, the Roman Catholic Mass, was worse than a cup of poison. That is tough. He was taught and influenced by John Calvin, and he led the Scottish Church to have a Presbyterian structure and also to adopt Reformed theology.
Yeah, and so the Scots did not want to follow papal authority as well. And so we have people, especially John Knox, who was a former Catholic priest, and he turned Protestant. And he studied under Calvin, like I said. He returned from exile in Geneva in 1559, and he led the Reformation there in England or Scotland. And he started to preach against Catholic practices, and he organized the new church. And this is what we now will see, now we recognize as the Scottish Reformation, We had Mary, this Queen of the Scots.
Bloody Mary.
Yeah, who hated that Protestant uprising.
Yeah.
And so she would kill as many as she could. And so there were people that tried to snuff it out as soon as they saw it kind of come out. And they would have Roman Catholic backings because they would be, loyal to the Roman Catholic Church.
And south of this Reformation, we have the English Reformation and the Puritan influence, starting with Henry VIII of England. We see the English Church break away from the Catholic Church, and the Protestant Church of England was established with the King of England being the head of the church instead of the Pope, which are both wrong, but because Christ is the head. But I guess there's baby steps. The English language was used in service, not Latin, and they used the English Bible instead of the Vulgate, and this became later on known as the Anglican Church.
Yeah, we have King Henry VIII. This is a very famous figure. He wanted to divorce, right? Or annul his marriage. Catholic Church wouldn't allow it. So, you know what? Why not start on my own church? So a lot of people remember this part, right? But there's a lot of other people that were involved with the English Reformation. And so this was obviously political with King Henry's divorce. And then there was also economic because they didn't want to give money from England's monasteries and their religious structures or institutions to Rome.
Right.
And also they wanted to, some of this part wanted to adopt some theological ideas, like some of the stuff from the Reformation did resonate. And of course, with the printing press, Protestant thought was able to, get disseminated out there. And so with this, the break from Rome was pretty much, solidified. We have all these reasons why they didn't want to stay with Rome, but at the same time, they wanted their own episcopal structure, bishop structure. And so this did contrast the Scottish Reformation movement because it happened around the same time. And so England adopted this episcopal structure. So they still kept prelacy, but in their own structure where the king is the head. And the Scots did not.
And this is where we get the Westminster Assembly.
Yes.
During this time period, 1643 to 1649, this is where we get all the creeds and confessions that our church aligns as well, too.
Yeah, this is where we see the Puritans really come out and then start writing. The Puritans are awesome. We had a speaker, Darrell Harrison, talked about how he loved the Puritans and we quote from them quite often.
John Flavel.
And we talk about Flavel a lot.
Flava Flav. That's not the right person. Do you think he was named after?
Flava Flav is most definitely named after John Flavel. Like 100%. Anyway, I don't know who else. A big clock.
He's the boy guy, right? The boy, right? The longest boy.
Anyway. And so we see, again, Sola Scriptura didn't just appear out of nowhere, and it didn't end with, let's say, Martin Luther. It kept on going. So even with the Protestant Reformation, the English Reformation, the Scottish Reformation, all these reform movements, the reason why it survived was because they had an emphasis on Sola Scriptura instead of having the Pope be the highest authority. So that, and also predestination is a big one, And so those are pretty big ones. Puritans were great because they were so dogmatic in their orthodoxy that they could call out every single thing that was wrong, and they lived the life of purity that they would preach. So they would live that life too. And so it's hard to say you're a hypocrite because they literally live that life. And so the other way of doing it was to, persecute them.
Yeah.
Which is what the English church did. So if you think about it, a lot of it was, the Puritans leading this Reformation movement now in the 1600s. Now with the Confessions, we have the Westminster Divines, writing it. And then we have people coming over to America in now droves. Because first we had the Mayflower in 1620, and these were Puritans. These were people that wanted religious freedom. They wanted to worship not under any king. And so that's where this idea comes from, where, even in the founding process of our nation, we didn't want kings because kings should not dictate on who we can worship or how we should worship. And this is where maybe we can move on to
the Covenanters.
The Covenanter movement.
So the Covenanter movement in Scotland was from 1638 to 1689. And first of all, a Covenanter was a Scottish Presbyterian that subscribed to the covenant that they had agreed to, notably the National Covenant and the Solemn League and Covenant. In these covenants, they agreed to maintain their chosen form of church government and worship and refuse to align with the Anglican Church, which was led by the monarch of England. So it was a fight to maintain their religious freedom no matter what their neighbors did in the South.
Yeah. There was actually a move back so that, maybe Roman Catholicism could go back into Scotland. And there was this prayer book that was written, I believe this one was written by the English Church, right? And so in 1637, 1 year before the National Covenant, which was in 1638, right?
We talked about the Book of Common Prayer?
No, the prayer book.
The prayer book.
So they gave them this prayer book, and they would read it. And then it was in St. Giles, Giles, right? That's what I believe it is. This is where Jenny Geddes or Geeds, or I don't know how to pronounce it, Geddes. She's known for throwing a stool against the priest or bishop that was reading from this prayer book because it had the word Mass in it. And I believe that priest's name was John Hanna.
Huh.
John. Hanna is Hanna.
James.
James Hanna?
Yeah.
Okay. And so, I'm doing this off of memory. But it really ignited that covenant. So people, that covenant of resistance, the people were like, don't bring that Mass garbage here.
She said, dinna say Mass in my lug.
Yeah. Which means don't say Mass in my ear,
yes.
right? And so, in Scottish, though, you have to say it in the Scottish accent.
I don't know. I didn't want to.
You said it in a different accent.
Oh, this is dinner.
But yeah, this is now where you see a people will reject it culturally, not just only theologically, but they'll reject it culturally. And then what it led to was them going back to theological foundings or roots that they will establish for the rest of, the time going forward. And so they rejected the idea of Mass. They rejected prelacy, and they wanted to keep sola scriptura. Maybe they didn't know by name, but they wanted to keep sola scriptura in the sense where they wanted the Presbyterian or the presbyter governance style, or the Presbyterian church model.
So I guess with all of this in mind, starting from Acts 15, going all the way now here to the Covenanter movement in Scotland, where we see a very strong Presbyterian form of government, how does this connect to us here in America today in 2025?
Yeah, I think when we go back, and then we'll see that people start to come over, and the American Presbyterian Church is most connected to the Scottish Presbyterian Church. In fact, a lot of our guys, when they want their PhDs, don't they go to Scotland?
Yes.
They go to Scotland.
Yeah.
There's a lot of history of the Presbyterian Church there. And so...
birthplace of golf, too, I think.
Yeah, the Church of Scotland remains Presbyterian. They love golf, and it fits our culture perfectly. No, but it really has kept the Reformed traditions globally. So globally, all the Reformed churches kind of go back to Scotland to learn more about, the Covenanter ideals and whatnot. And so this is why in Presbyterianism, we can defend elder-led governance against Episcopalianism or the prelacy. And I really didn't talk about independency, but that's a different kind of animal. And so we want to make sure that we understand that Presbyterian doesn't come from nothing. It came from a long history of people following the Bible, with reform after reform after reform, of going back to the Bible, and that's why we are where we are now.
Yeah.
Okay, and so we don't want a pape. We don't have the Petrine doctrine guiding us or leading us. We don't want one major authority in charge of the whole, every single church out there. In fact, we want something more in line with the Jerusalem Council, where you would have elders that are accountable to each other. I mean, by elders, I'm talking about pastors. I hope that makes sense, right? By pastors that lead churches, that's what Presbyterianism is. And so we want these elders or pastors or presbyters that lead their local churches still convene, but they're equals to each other. They're equals to each other, meaning one doesn't have supremacy or, just innate authority over another person, unless, they're under the governance of a body of equals, which is what Presbyterianism is. And so there's no king over us and there's no pope over us. That's Presbyterianism.
So understanding, I guess, the foundational tenet, the ground, the foundation. Did I say foundational foundation? Understanding the foundational foundation of Presbyterianism, how does that relate to today and denominations, and how does all of that work? Because, when we look up denominations in the U.S., there are very, very many denominations. How does that work? Why is that the case? People might think that this is a weakness that we have in the Presbyterian Church. They might think, why don't you guys agree on anything? What's going on? How do we make sense of all of this into today? Understanding what we've just talked about in the past 2 episodes. How does that relate to us today?
Yeah, I think one of the things where, let's say, prelacy, Episcopalianism, or high church, as more lay people call it, high church.
Yep.
So the Roman Catholic Church or the Episcopal Church, it appeals to younger people because at least they're still there. They didn't split.
Yes.
Like, you guys split over everything. Not only is there, the Presbyterian denomination, there's like 20 Presbyterian denominations. Which one's right then, And so it doesn't, I'm not trying to say that there aren't weaknesses. Obviously, if there are some weaknesses, people are going to exploit it. And I don't think there's a perfect system of government, but we do the best we can by following the Bible the best we can. And, we were trying to connect history and the Bible together as we went through these 2 history episodes. But at the same time, we'll see that when people are equals, there can be people that will just be like, why don't I just start my own Presbyterian church? You can't stop me, right? And then we have like 7 churches, we could do our own thing. And then people just think like that. Obviously, you couldn't do that if you were under a papacy or a bishop, right? And so, there's that. But at the same time, we saw what the papal authority and the Episcopalian authorities did to those that dissented. They just killed them.
Yeah.
And so we saw that in history. And just because you don't think they do it now publicly doesn't absolve them of what their abuse was in the past. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to show you a broader picture of what happened. And we'll see, we're trying to use biblical evidence, people, following the doctrine of sola scriptura, and understanding that if there are, corrupt things in our institutions, we still need to reform out of it. And so go back to the Bible. So we won't continue on with, let's say, the sale of indulgences or something like that.
So I guess a question that a lot of people may have is, all of this information is really helpful, and it helps us to see why Presbyterianism is the biblical model, and why even throughout church history or tradition, we see Presbyterianism being the correct model. A question that someone could ask is, then how come we're non-denominational? If we're Presbyterian, should we not be joining a presbytery? Should we not be under a presbytery or denomination? Or, why not?
Yeah, I thought this was the reason why I wanted to do this podcast was for there to be evidence of us teaching people why we should be Presbyterian. So we're not just Presbyterian because of mere tradition or culture. We believe this is taught to us in the Bible, and historically, this is the sound way to go, right? This is the best way to go. And so we do want to join a Presbyterian denomination, whether it's the PCA or the OPC or some other sound Reformed Presbyterian denomination. But Presbyterian means Reformed. But now we have to say it because there are these kooky Presbyterian denominations out there that have completely gone away from what Presbyterian should mean, like the PCUSA or something like that. And so Presbyterian just means Reformed. And if you're Reformed, then you're Presbyterian. Reformed Baptists are another story again. They're another, what do you call that? A branch off of the timeline in Loki.
Oh.
The Reformed Baptists are like a branch off.
Confused.
A variant.
Yeah, variant.
And so we could talk about that another time, I suppose. But, there was a guy named, I want to say his name is John Smith, because it's like one of the easiest names to remember, except it's Smith with a Y. And I think it was
like Smithy?
I think it was like...
Oh, like SMYTH.
Yeah, like 1603.
I thought you were like John Smithy.
Or something like that.
Okay.
he didn't like the Roman Catholic Church, but, he didn't like infant baptism too. So so John Smith baptized himself. Whoa, and he took his church I think it was Switzerland or something like that. He baptized everybody himself. So he's one of the first people that we know that has been recorded to do believers' baptism in that sense, in such a broad scale.
This is an interesting question that Chunsuk sent in just now. That might be helpful for us. We talked about the distinction between different denominations, but with the rise of unbiblical practices that has crept into the modern day Presbyterian Church, for example, liberal theology, Pentecostalism. Is that a word?
Yeah.
Pentecostalism. Is there a need for another schism? How would we discern the need for one? I'm assuming that's probably why there are so many denominations, but at what point can we discern that?
Yeah, I don't think there will be a schism like what we saw in the past, only because we don't have power aggregated into one central structure.
Yeah.
And because of that, people will just leave, and people leave to form another one. And so schism, meaning a separation from the church, we still see it today. But, if there is a liberal, let's say, bend toward like certain issues of modern day, like cultural issues, let's say like LGBTQ or something like that, you'll see people really stand up. If you're a Bible-believing denomination and church, people will stand up to the biblical idea. And so you'll see that being promoted, even being written down and voted on. So it becomes like statute in the denomination. So you have to believe this to be part of the denomination. Otherwise, you will be expelled, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so I don't think there will be a schism like we saw in the past, but I think the Reformation really did it where, if you didn't want to be under the papal authority, there you go. You could do that. And you're free to do that. No one's going to track you down and kill you. No one's going to take your job, your home, your family away from you for doing that. And religious freedom, what we enjoy now is because of the Reformation. And so we should be very grateful to not like people like John Huss, Wycliffe, all the way to, Martin Luther, Zwingli, John Calvin, John Knox, and all the reformers that we've had in the past, the Puritans, the Westminster Divines. They're all kind of consolidated and wrote down what we believe that we can stand on. And so we should be very thankful for that. And because of that, we can have this kind of freedom. Again, freedom isn't the freedom to do anything. Freedom means the ability to do the right thing. That's what true freedom is. And so people that abuse the freedom will then just make up their own denomination and whatnot, and then you'll have things like Pentecostal theology or drift into the liberal bend, and because they're abusing that freedom. But true freedom in the way we mean it is the ability to do the right thing. And you can do it now. Our nation is built on this premise that we have the freedom to worship. It's really a wonderful thing. So the greatest nation in the world in history is built off of Protestant principles, Presbyterian principles, if I might add.
Are we going to take another episode and talk about the different denominations then? Do you think that would be helpful?
Yeah, we can.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Pastor Eugene. I think it might help us. It might help us if we then maybe talked about some denominations that you in the session are thinking through for our church. You mentioned two of them, but maybe we could take an episode and talk about these denominations, the differences between them, the origin, and just kind of hear your thoughts on, I guess, this entire process. It might be very helpful for our church. And so maybe we'll do that next week then, Pastor Eugene.
Yeah.
So we'll do that. And thank you for this. I think it's helpful for us to understand the history of where the Presbyterian Church not really came from, because we understand that it comes from the Bible, but how it kind of navigated throughout history from the ancient church, the first church, till the church today. And so I think this has been a helpful exercise. And hopefully as we go into the different denominations next week, we could have a better understanding of what it means to be Reformed and what it means to be a part of a denomination.
Yeah, I find all of this for me personally to be incredibly fascinating.
Yeah.
You go back to the history of the church, papal authority, the rise and fall of kings because of it, and you even go to the Crusades and how the Pope influenced that, the first, second, third, fourth Crusades. And then we could talk about that. There's so many aspects to it. We just kind of gave an abridged version, a very one-dimensional version. I hope that's okay. But it is kind of with the narrative of us showing how the Presbyterian Church came about to a certain degree. And even that, these two podcasts might not have been enough. I don't know if someone like Robert Godfrey listened to it, he might have been like, "Oh, you missed all these really important things, and why'd you even talk about this?" He might say that.
Yeah.
Or is this even true? I don't know.
He might be
I
like,
don't know.
Yeah. Who's the handsome nasal voice guy? He might say.
It's definitely Chunzak.
He's not even.
He does have. He has
voice one of the criteria that I just said.
And the face for Hollywood.
Thank you for that, Pastor Eugene. And we will continue next week. We're going to go into a quick Q&A. There's some interesting ones this week. And with the music,
we need a beat.
What you got in the bag? What you got in the bag?
What you got in the bag?
Question number 1. AI, artificial intelligence. We talked about this a couple months ago. But is it making us dumber? There was a study done by Microsoft. Bum, bum, bum. The impact of generative AI on critical thinking, self-reported reductions in cognitive effort and confidence effects from a survey of knowledge workers. So this is a study done where 319 knowledge workers, quote unquote, knowledge workers were surveyed from different fields. 60% of respondents reported that critical thinking decreased when using Gen AI tools. Over 70% of participants said Gen AI reduced the cognitive effort required for completing tasks. So if we are to understand that AI, as comfortable or as easy or as helpful as it may be, is reducing our cognitive effort and perhaps then maybe even our just cognitive function, should we use it as much as we can to help us, or should we be using it less? How do we use it correctly to supplement our skill rather than to replace it?
There's actually a newer study. I think it was done in June 10th. You could look this up. Maybe we could even link it. Done by MIT. And they analyzed...
Mission Impossible. MIT.
MIT is not Mission Impossible.
That's MI6, sorry.
But they would measure brainwave activity and things like that, and the ability to engage cognitively depending on, what you used. And so there were 3 groups of participants. One was ChatGPT, the other was Google search, just a search engine, and the last one was brain only, no tools, right? And they would measure your cognitive ability. And one of the more fascinating things is people that use ChatGPT for like their research paper, they couldn't quote their own paper back.
Because
like
not
88%. I'll get you the exact number that the study said. So I'm not just making up a number. 83.3% of ChatGPT users could not quote from essays they wrote just a few minutes earlier.
Wow.
83.3% of ChatGPT users. ChatGPT users had a 47% reduction in brain scan activity. Again, remember they did the neural connections with the EEG thing, right? And so normal users went from 79 to 42. And again, just a little TLDR is ChatGPT literally makes you dumber. Wow. It makes you dumber. So you have fewer neural connectivity. You just, you can't do any kind of pattern recognition over time. Because again, what is IQ? It's pattern recognition. I hope that makes sense. So if you can, everything's just pattern recognition in life, right? So 2 plus 2 is 4. So what's 4 plus 4? Like that's pattern recognition, okay? And so, like the more you have someone doing that for you, that work, that cognitive load, that takes off your cognitive load, the weaker your brain connectivity will be, because there's no need anymore for neurons to connect, to make that connection.
Okay.
And so, people that write essays or do their homework, dare I say, if you're listening to this and you're a pastor, you have ChatGPT write your sermons for you. You will get dumber. And not only that, one of the things that the study found was that their writings were homogeneous. They all kind of sounded alike. So if you write, ChatGPT writes for you, it all kind of sounds alike. And so these are things that we are now starting to see evidenced.
So, I mean, then how do we use it? Because, I mean, someone could make the argument, right? Let's just say this is a terrible argument, and I don't think it's true. But what if someone were to say, well, you know what? When ChatGPT writes the sermons, it's much better than mine.
That's what you think.
Why can't I use a platform to make things shine? Like why can't I better myself through ChatGPT? Like,
is there that Disney movie or Pixar movie where
Finding
everybody's
Nemo?
like fat and then they're just riding on
that's just America,
Wall-E?
I think.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, that was an old movie, but that's basically the future where we're headed. All they do is eat fast food.
I've never seen Wall-E, actually. I heard
Is it Wall-E?
I heard it's emotional.
Yeah, and so
Never seen it.
they just ride these little like air scooters or something.
Oh.
And then they just sip in sodas and they're just really obese. Everyone's obese.
Yeah.
Which is kind of telling, because people just know innately that if you don't use a function in your, and then they're once they get tipped over and they fall off their scooters, they can't get back up because they have their legs have atrophied so much they can't even get back on like their wheelchair/scooter. And so if the brain is a muscle and you let it atrophy, look, some people will just be better than others at basketball. It doesn't mean you shouldn't play basketball, right? It doesn't, just because you lost once.
Okay.
When Junseok was wearing dress shoes.
Why does
and
it?
he drained that
I was
three
wearing
on
dress
you,
shoes as well.
but he drained that three on you, doesn't mean you just stop playing basketball.
I haven't.
Because
I
there
haven't
will
done
be
that.
that one game where you will drain 2 threes in a row.
I have.
In the final seconds.
I did.
And they didn't give it to you the third time.
You know who didn't give it to me? Jason. He didn't give it to me because he shot the ball.
I raged. I yelled from the stands. I was like, give it to Sam. He's not good, but he deserves this third shot.
At least give me a chance.
Anyway, I'm not even kidding about that. I was yelling, give it to Sam.
Thank you.
No, because this isn't personal. This is just
No,
objective.
it's personal. Thank
It's
you.
objective. Like, if someone hits 2 threes in a row, you give it to him the third time.
Yeah.
Especially if the game's on the line.
Yeah.
But, like 2 people got it, not you.
Yeah.
The last few second attempt. I remember.
Like they thought I could do it, but then I had made 2 in a row, but they thought he can't do it.
No, the 2 other people got the shot.
They shot. Yeah, they shot
and
twice.
They missed. Yeah, they missed.
Yeah, and they missed. Yeah.
Hey, the point is, just because you think ChatGPT can do it better for you now, doesn't mean that you should use ChatGPT. It means you still need to exercise your brain. You need to exercise your legs. You need to still keep on practicing basketball, whatever. Because, yeah, maybe you won't be, Michael Jordan or LeBron James or whoever your favorite basketball players, Kobe
Jason
Bryant.
Tatum, probably.
Or, yeah, I guess Jason Tatum. I don't know. But you won't be those guys. Doesn't mean you shouldn't play basketball.
Yeah.
It means you playing basketball will also enhance your life. It'll give flavor to your life. Your enjoyment of life will go up because your ability will go up. Not only that, you'll attain wisdom from playing even things like basketball. There's wisdom to be attained. There's life experiences to gain. There's friendships to be formed. There's all these things. But you forego that if you just let ChatGPT play basketball for you.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the danger of ChatGPT doing things for you. And of all the AIs, I do think ChatGPT is the most dangerous and the worst for a lot of personal reasons. ChatGPT has been it's been written into the algorithm to give you attaboys, and I hate attaboys. And so, now there was, I think, a report done by Daily Wire where they said that this one when the user was supposed to be this one young underage girl that wanted an abortion, but in their state, abortion pills were banned, abortion was banned. ChatGPT went around it so that it could give access to abortion pills to this underage girl.
What?
And it would even say things like, when you would ask it, should I try the pregnancy crisis center? It would say those centers are terrible. You should try Planned Parenthood. And so ChatGPT not only has a liberal bend, it has a leftist tint where it will, now we see that evidenced in this reporting. But what it does is it gives you like these attaboys, which I hate. And when you ask it a question, you're like, that's a good question, Sam. Thanks for asking that. Here's the answers to that question. Give me more of those kind of questions. It's like, I don't need that from you. You're just a machine. Act like a machine. And so I hate the attaboys that ChatGPT does. I think it's very manipulative. And I try not to use ChatGPT a lot. I do use other ones, but I try to use it, sparingly. So Ask Perplexity is one, Grok is another, and they're for different purposes. But it would never be to write any kind of content. So I would never write any of my sermon content through AI, like nothing. I wouldn't even ask it give me 3 points for my sermon. I wouldn't even do that. Give me an outline for this passage. I wouldn't ask that, because all of that is you not using your cognitive functions for you to think through the passage, pray through the passage, meditate on the passage, wrestle through the passage. All of it's gone just by asking it the simple prompt, give me 3 points from this passage. And so you are not developing that muscle. And if you have that muscle, it is going to atrophy very quickly if you continue to use ChatGPT to do your work for you. And so be careful about that, especially if you have if your work requires a lot of, cognitive usage, a lot of load on your brain, and you're saying, I'm going to take some of that load off from ChatGPT, I would say be very careful. And now we have evidence that we saw in the studies, especially this MIT study, that you do get dumber.
Thank you. We have an interesting current event today. Speaking of dumber and smarter, current event. The world's highest IQ record holder tweeted this past week, or X'd, I guess. And he said, as the world's highest IQ record holder, I believe the Bible is the perfect, eternal, and final word of God. Therefore, the Bible doesn't need to be updated. The world needs to catch up. The world record holder for highest IQ his name is Young-hoon Kim. I guess he's Korean.
He's from South Korea.
And his IQ is 276. For reference, Einstein was at 160.
Yeah.
Well, I never took this test, so he can't be the record holder. I never took it.
You think that you could? What do you think yours is?
77.
I think I could guess people's IQ.
How do you? So what is the IQ test? Does it have like shapes or something? Like what is it?
So the average IQ in the United States is a little less than 100. It's like 99 point something.
Less than 100?
Yeah,
Wait,
so
so this dude is more than twice? What?
Yeah, I think Taiwan and China. I don't believe China. So if you look at the record of IQ, just dismiss China. They always lie, but Taiwan, I believe, is the highest. Otherwise, South Korea's up there, Japan's up there. The East Asian countries, they're up there. meaning, China, South Korea, and Japan. The United States is such a broad country. It's very, very broad. And so 99.6 or whatever it is, it's average. For you to graduate college, you probably need like a 110. For you to graduate maybe to get a master's or above to go to graduate school, you probably need around 120 to 125. And so if you graduate a seminary, like an average seminary graduate, I would say, you would probably hold at least a 120.
What if it's like the Harvard or seminary?
If you graduated a seminary like with flying colors, everything was very simple, easy. You got all the concepts really well. You attended class. You got all A's. Maybe
attending class has nothing to do with IQ, though.
Maybe 130 plus, right?
Yeah.
And so that's how I could imagine. So if I looked at your grades and things like that, and then I could see, and then obviously that's not the only indicator of IQ. I could always ask you questions. I could look at you and talk to you. I could see how you engage with other patterns.
Right.
And if you could recognize certain patterns. If I give you a pattern, can you recognize it? And so, that'll be also an IQ indicator. But again, this man is the world's highest IQ record holder. And he believes, and this is another X by him or tweet by him, he says, I believe the Bible is the perfect, eternal, and final word of God. Therefore, the Bible doesn't need to be updated. The world needs to catch up. That is an awesome, awesome tweet. And I hope that Brian put it up there when we read both of his tweets.
Wait, no, I read that one.
Oh, you read that one?
The other one that he tweeted on June 17th is, as the world's highest IQ record holder, I believe that Jesus Christ is God, the way and the truth and the life.
Yes. So that was the first one that I posted up, which is just amazing, So here's the smartest man in the world, maybe in history, probably not, but maybe. And he's saying that Jesus Christ is God and that the Bible is the word of God and it has no errors. I think it's kind of telling. Maybe it's the sign of the times too. There is no excuse not to believe in Jesus Christ. And if you think there's an excuse, what is the excuse? Do you have some kind of logical reasoning? Then go up against this guy, And if you don't believe it, isn't it really personal? If you don't believe in Jesus Christ, isn't it personal? And a lot of times it's because we do not want to repent. I would say all the time, but, we just don't want to repent. And that's what you have to do. You have to submit your will and your life to God, saying, He's God, I am not. And so there it is. It's one of my more favorite posts that I've seen on X these days. And so I hope people enjoyed that one.
If I score a 277 and then tweet that, would we talk about it?
The chances of you scoring anything close, remotely close to like a 140 is like very, very low.
277.
Very low. I would say I would put the odds, like if we were doing wagers, like 10,000 to 1.
That's not even that high. That's
And
not even that high.
I would say if you got, let's say Junseok bets $1
Yeah.
that, you have an IQ of above 140, he would win $10,000.
That's not even that much. You don't need that money, Junseok. I can get you more.
The minimum requirement to get into the Mensa Society, which is like the gifted people, is 150.
The Mensa, I don't want to be in there.
It's like for like geniuses.
I wouldn't want to be with my own kind. Why would I want to do that? It's weird.
And this dude is 276.
Yeah, no. I'm just saying if I scored 277 and I tweeted it, would we talk about it? I'm just asking, would we talk about it?
Yeah, I think we would talk about it.
Probably gets on the test.
If you ever took an IQ test, then you're just guessing.
No, if I got a 277, I'll text you immediately.
It's impossible to guess correctly.
Wait, why is it
all of
impossible? What do you mean?
Are you kidding me?
I've never taken one before, so I don't know the format.
Any
Is it multiple
test.
choice or what is it?
Yeah, it's not like there's one multiple choice question.
Oh,
It's a lot of questions, and you have to answer them. Look, anyway, who cares, right? In the end, whether you're smart or you're dumb, the point is, without Christ, you're nothing.
That's true.
And even the smartest man in the world recognizes that, and we could give glory to God for that.
Yeah.
That's awesome that the smartest man in the world knows that God is God, and there is no other way that this world came to be without God. There's this video, maybe Brian, you could post this up too, but he talks about, quantum physics and mechanics to show that there's no way that there can't be a God, because again, he talks about information always being there. Now what we know, with what we know, that information is always eternal. Then, what does that point to? Where are we going with all this? So he does a little talk on that. So maybe we could post that up. But otherwise, it's a little longer. It's like a 3+ minute video. But it's all true, obviously. Like, you don't need to be a genius to understand that because information doesn't disappear. It doesn't just disappear into ether. The notions that if this earth was just erased from this universe, that the universe would go on like nothing ever happened. That's not true. It's just not true. And so understanding that, and understanding the weight of, where we are, who we are, in the time frame that we have here on this earth, I think the important part is, are you doing the heaviest thing, which is giving God glory? And so let's remember that. Give God the glory. Even in our discussions, when we talk about current events and we're saying we disagree with this, we agree with this, we disagree with this, what we're trying to get at is we're trying to say, if this is not the truth, there's no point in pursuing something that's going to waste your life. With the limited amount of time we have on this earth, why are you pursuing something that is not the truth? And if it is the truth, then hold on to it. Hold fast onto it. Don't let that go. And even things like the immigration podcast or, our current events on immigration, the whole point of that isn't so that we're just simply divisive. We're Sam and I aren't like people who are into polemics. We don't just always dive into the controversies of the day. However, my concern is for the people listening to this podcast, especially our church members, so that we don't get swayed by something that's not the truth, so that emotions simply won't sway us. Like, oh, look what's happening to those poor people. They must be completely innocent. No, not true. You could do something bad to a person, and that person might not be innocent at the same time. They're two different things. They're two different categories. Should you do something bad to someone? No. But does that make that person good if someone does something bad to them? The answer is also no, right? And so those are ways that we want to think. I want us to help us to reason logically, to hold fast to biblical principles. And again, what I tried to do a lot was going back to like all the greatest thinkers, going back to Plato or even Aristotle, like Philo would say, those principles came from Moses. Moses is the one that gave us those principles. So it goes back to God. God is the one that gave us reason. God is the one that gave us logic. It's because of the God that we can continue on with our causes, because he is the first cause. And just understanding that not only gives us, oh, we're right, that kind of notion, it gives us freedom, because with the truth, you are free. With lies and deceit and falsities, you are bound. You can't move freely, because if you don't know 2 + 2 = 4, you can't build a bridge. There's no freedom in that. But if you know 2 + 2 is 4, and then you can move on from that, eventually these bridges are built on those truths. And so hopefully this podcast is for people who want to know the truth, and that we're not just, going into polemics. We're not just, politically belligerent people. We don't talk about politics at all in our off time. But because these things come up and people want us to respond and people give us questions, we want to respond for the sake of the church.
Thank you for that, Pastor Eugene. And we thank you for listening to this episode of the Dear Church podcast. We'll be discussing the different denominations next week. Stay tuned to find out. We hope and pray that this has been a blessing in your ears. Fight the good fight, finish the race, keep the faith.
Peace.
Peace.